So thanks for joining the LGMA webinar for today. We'll just give a couple of minutes for everyone to settle down, and thanks for your patience. We'll be starting 1 minute. So colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 12th monthly webinar for local governments and municipal authorities constituency in the year 2022, which was particularly designed for COP27, obviously. This, as you can imagine, this is our last webinar of the year. So we will particularly focus on our strategy towards next year. Before we start, let me just introduce myself for those who are new. My name is Yunus Arikan. I'm the Director of Global Advocacy at ICLEI Local Governments for Sustainability, which is also the focal point of LGMA to the UNFCCC Constitution. And I'm delivering this task since 2009. This is a series of webinars that is taking place every month, and we are having it in 2 sessions. The first one in the morning in the European time zone, and this is the afternoon session. For those who are not familiar, we are running the webinars with sometimes our partners and participants are able to interact after the interventions. If there's any burning issue that you would like to intervene during the webinar, during the presentation, feel free to type it in the chat box. Otherwise, we will encourage you to participate in the Q&A session at the end. This webinar is recorded and also uploaded on the YouTube channel of ICLEI, and you will also get a copy of the link for the presentation. As we said before, in the morning session for this year, for today's webinar, we were delighted to have colleagues from UN Habitat, Bernard Barth and Lea Renalder. Bernard, for those who are not familiar, Bernard is based in Japan, and Lea is now based in Nairobi. Obviously, for Bernard, it's almost impossible for him to join us, and I think Lea is also a bit challenging. So I'll try to complement the sessions that, especially on the way forward and the outcome of the COP27 ministerial and the surge initiative. I have it. We have it in our slides. And in those who are available, who remember, of course, since the beginning of this year, our sessions are also having a slot for the follow-up on the negotiations of the biodiversity process, especially this year, COP15, and those who are following the process. In fact, today, the second week of the biodiversity negotiations in Montreal started, and obviously you can expect that the whole city biodiversity and a huge number of LGMA constituencies is now in Montreal in person and even participating virtually. So it's possible that my colleagues, Kobe Brandt and Ingrid Kotze, cannot join us, but we also have reserved 1 slide in terms of what are the expectations or what are the outcomes coming from Montreal, from the biodiversity summit for local and regional governments as well. So with this, let me go to our session's presentation. Once again, what is LGMA? Who is LGMA? We are the voice of cities and regions in the UN climate negotiations since '95. This is one of the oldest constituencies. In fact, LGMA is now officially encompassing around, I think, more than 40, sometimes something around 50 organizations. But these are the ones who are only the ones who are accredited to the UNFCCC. That goes through some period process. But during this webinar and our yearly engagement, especially in the COPs, we're also trying to make sure that this process is open and inclusive. All the networks that are interested in this process, so we're very happy that we can reach out to an even broader audience. And what we do, we basically have 4 main axes of engagement. So first of all, we try to contribute into the agenda of the negotiation by submitting our views, providing our inputs by submissions, interventions, participating in the workshops throughout the year. Secondly, of course, since Paris onwards, there is an important agenda called Action Agenda, led by the high-level climate action champions, and we are also participating. Most of the LGMA members or partners are part of this process as well, but we are aware Action Agenda is beyond constituency in the UNFCCC space. Obviously, COPs, the climate conference, are a cyclic process. Every year there's a presidency announced by the host region, and each of those presidencies have different priorities and different styles of engagement. We try to participate in this process or support the presidencies, but of course, compared to our engagement in the UNFCCC negotiations and action agenda, which is defined by certain practices under the UNFCCC, in the case where we are related to presidencies, it doesn't have necessarily a presidency. So each time it's a different format and a process of engagement. So we are trying to be flexible in that. And finally, we know the UN climate negotiations are processes that are, the decisions are adopted by the parties, and we also try to make sure we are connected to the friends of multi-level action, those countries who are supporting the multi-level action, both at home, but also in the global process, so that through this engagement mechanism, we can also try to make sure that beyond parties, beyond the presidents, we can also have contributions from the parties as well. Especially for COP, we had released a daily update. We had the film, we'll talk about it very shortly. You can watch or you can receive or you can read the daily mailings from COP so that you can refresh your memories of what has happened. In this presentation, we will touch upon some of the outcomes again, but we will particularly focus on our vision for the next steps. For those, let's refresh our memory. We have started to COP in Sharm el-Sheikh with the vision that we have to go from time for multi-level action to multi-level action delivers. We had the multi-level action recognized in Glasgow Climate Pact. It is now time to deliver it and to make sure that the second phase of the Paris Agreement is much better than the first one. Obviously, we wanted to focus on NDCs, particularly bridging the commitments and the announcements of cities to Race to Zero and other initiatives. We definitely said that COP26 in Glasgow had an unfinished business climate emergency, and we want to bring those topics into the debate. We wanted to make sure this time we have first ever climate and urbanization ministerial, and obviously we want to make sure there is a strong engagement of our regional partners in Africa, as well as Mediterranean, Middle East, North Africa as well. Over these months, especially when we have started to engage with the presidency, with the Surge Initiative, we will touch upon it a bit again. We have worked intensively over the past 6 months. So we recalibrated our priorities for COP, and we focused on 3 main priorities. First of all, the Surge Initiative as the first ever holistic approach to urbanization in the climate space to be endorsed by as wide as possible from the parties and non-parties. We wanted the UNFCCC community to welcome the urbanization and climate ministerial as a regular agenda item so that they benefit from this process, but we as a local and regional governments also benefit from this process. And finally, this was a climate emergency, and we wanted the finance discussion to be shaping up very clearly, including Article 6, subnational development banks, as well as the project, the preparatory facilities. If we look at what has been immediately outcomes, so first of all, it was a challenging COP, much more challenging than ever. It was for the first time that Global South was hosting it since 6 years, and it is now announced as the largest, the most crowded participation that has ever been achieved in the climate space. Of course, it's not easy to handle this space with so many participants, even in a space like Sharm el-Sheikh, where logistically there were huge opportunities, but still managing of all these 49,000 people was really a challenge. And of course, Egypt had the pressure of the Global South as well to make sure that their voices are heard. With the cover decision, we were expecting it for us a bit better than what we had achieved, because we were relying on the urbanization climate ministerial. Later on, it became clear that the outcome document or outcome text were not ready by the time we meet, so it was a bit a pity. But we also have noticed none of the initiatives of the COP27 presidency was addressed in any of the decisions. For us, at least our initiative surge and some of the other were acknowledged in the climate agenda, action agenda, and we were very happy with the way it was communicated, but many of those things were invisible in the outcome decision, so which is something that is beyond our capacity as LGMA. We are happy that there was a lot of references to the transformative topics that is driving us to the root cause of climate emergence, which are food, nature, culture, that are addressed somehow, even renewable energy, which was not addressed at all. But of course, there was a frustration that the lack of reference to fossil fuel phase out was not strengthened, but it is also a reality that this was already gone during the year because of the Russian invasion of war and the impacts of geopolitics. Loss and damage is particularly something that we are very happy because Scottish government, since COP26, have been part of this process, leading this to break this taboo of the global north. And we are very happy that this is changing the process. If the COP27 was successful, there is definitely a role that subnational government like Scotland has played a role in this process. But more importantly, let's remember the importance of the loss and damage is that it is not just that it is responding to the need, but the vision is a forward-looking vision, which is it is trying to shape the future multilateral multilateral trade agreements, banking system, so that it is also, let's remember, we had seen the climate debate influencing the energy discussion in the 90s, then technology and industrialization because of the low carbon technologies. And now it is in the age of climate emergency, it's the right moment to make climate agenda influence finance, banking, and multilateral trade. So in that sense, it's really very, very exciting. We are happy that Article 6.8 is advancing with urbanization, but the rules are not defined yet. The new list is not announced yet. This gives us the chance that we can advance further. So obviously, what we are saying is that that in fact COP26 and COP27 was a complementary to each other. So together we can say that it is now the second phase is starting. And of course, finance, capacity building, and governance will be the key here, where multi-level action will be a strong factor. We will touch upon this in our roadmap for the key takeaways as well. Every year we have different agendas at COP, but in Sharm el-Sheikh, 90% of our engagement was in the blue zone, and multi-level action pavilion served as its home for citizens of national. We once again are proud to collaborate with our partners, including Scottish government as the host, but also the Egyptian government as the in collaboration with and 45 plus partners across the world who have mobilized time, dedicated energy, and financing to contribute to the cost of technical planning of this space, which we are very happy that across the 2 weeks we had more than 500 representatives of local energy governments from different accredited organizations and parties. These include more than 150 political leaders, mayors, councillors, governors, and even at the pavilion we had 50 plus sessions. But across the UNFC space, I think we have more than 200 engagements across the whole 2 weeks. We, of course, are very proud that the more than 10 years of our request to have a bridge between urban community and climate community has finally take place. The first ever climate and urbanization minister was a remarkable milestone. It was in a place where negotiations were convening, so that is making us even better or different than other initiatives on action agendas. And it was a full packed room. There were around 50 ministers from across the world. And it was also the opportunity where we announced officially the Surge Initiative, which is the largest collaboration of the urban and climate community. In that sense, it is a process evolving. So it's not the end that we have had achieved in COP27, but just on the contrary, the work is just advancing. We will touch upon it. We also would like to recognize that this was coinciding with the IPCC summary for urban policymakers, which is again giving us the chance that there are more opportunities for acting on cities, acting on urbanization in the second phase of Paris Agreement. We are, of course, very happy with this Global South endorsement, but we are also very happy countries like US, Japan, the fantastic model of engagement with the Dutch delegation, where Minister of the Environment and Mayor of Utrecht, Mayor Dijksma, joined to address the urbanization ministerial, which is a concrete example of multi-level action, was very, very powerful. We're also very happy to have the Global North continue to be interested in that, such as the EU-led Carbon Neutral Cities mission, or missions that is focusing on other carbon urban transition missions, which is also expanding the carbon neutral cities across the world. So that is giving us the sense that this is holistic, but also inclusive. All the types of governments, local governments, will benefit from this process, including collaboration with their national governments. And we're very excited because there was also a very strong statement from the multilateral development banks announced by the EBR, the European Bank of Reconstruction and Development, which is giving us the hope that there will be resources to support this kind of an action-oriented partnership. Surge is still surging. We can definitely say this morning, Leah and Bernard has mentioned that there is more organization endorsing to this process. We are keeping the LGMA website, the hub for Surge for the time being. So there is still room for others to join us, and we will encourage you to be more active involved, and we'll discuss about the next steps shortly as well. Of course, urbanization minister was important, but throughout the 2 weeks, LGMA was very active in all the official UNFCCC processes, starting from the morning, starting from the opening statement to our engagement at the opening and closing of the Global Action Agenda, the Leaders Summit, the Climate Action Breakthrough Labs, activities focusing on global stocktake, where we also had participated. We had also the first intervention in the climate finance, the debate by the ministers, and then we also, of course, have been involved in other speeches. So if you look at that, we have from Tokyo to Lusaka, from Auckland to Alton. So that is across the world, all continents. Their leaders from governors, mayors, African and all the continents were represented actively, and their statements really proved to be powerfully motivating both the hosts and also giving the power that this agenda will continue to take forward in the days ahead. So if we look at not just about only the decisions, but really the bird's eye view about what is really coming out of COP27, here are three main takeaways, which is mainly on behalf of ICLE or from ICLE's perspective. There is the good of this process, which is that climate ambition and climate justice is now having equal footing into the climate action agenda, so that the climate community can now accelerate for emergency mode of action. That is really an issue, because when we have started even preparations, yes, we were agreeing that it will be implementation COP, but addressing implementation without addressing the biggest priority to the global south, which is climate justice, was almost impossible. So it was surprising that it was one of the shortest period of time when an agenda was adopted and the result is achieved. So of course, the loss and damage fund is still in the making. There may be some frustrations, there may be some delays, but let's be realistic, there's no way going back. And in that sense, this is giving us the confidence that from now on, we can much better focus on implementation. And that's also a responsibility for us as well. There is the essential of it. So in every agenda topic, from loss and damage to stocktake, from Article 6 to ACE to, of course, surge and urbanization. And even on the way during COP or even before COP, the announcements from US, Japan, EU, everywhere you can see the references to local and regional governments. So we are, once again, we have the new normal of the second phase of the Paris Agreement, which is multi-level action that is empowered by the transformative vision of the sustainable urbanization. So that is now inevitable. That is, it's part of the bread and butter of the whole process. That is, I think, is something that gives us the confidence that and gives more responsibility for us. And the inevitable. It is true that a global process like climate negotiations, it's impossible now to continue in the format that we have started 25, 30 years ago. It's really hard to expect a concrete result when 49,000 people are coming to a space for 2 weeks. By the time we understand which meeting room is where, the COP is already over. So from parties engagement, decision making to stakeholder engagement, the COP and the UNFCCC process really has to revamp, and that should be fit for the Paris Agreement, the first century vision. And the good thing is that we have addressed this as the LGMA, and the UNFCCC Secretariat is also addressing this. So it's clear that the new era cannot be continued with the business as usual, because we have already changed through the Paris Agreement. It is time to change the process as well. Things may not be easy, and it's of course very hard in such a process like climate change. But we are confident. Even Executive Secretary said that there will be some things that can be immediately into effect in the next couple of months. But overall, the process may take around 2 or 3 years. But this is time for us to be thinking also big, so that the multi-level engagement is also much better than what it used to be before. This is the key outcomes, or let's say takeaways, and what is expecting us in terms of what will happen throughout the year. This is a mapping of what to expect. I mean, we are expecting that compared to 2022, 2023 would be less hectic. Let's be realistic. Last year, or the year that we're in, was particularly busy because so many meetings were postponed, and then because of the COVID, and then there was a plethora of events. We had 4 COPs: climate, biodiversity, desertification, and Ramsar. We had a UN Environment Assembly and UNEP plus 50. It was really a huge challenge in the global arena to make sure that we are participating as appropriate. The LGMA constituency was also having a huge difficulty because we had the 3 big networks having their world congresses: ICLE, UCLG, C40. Obviously, our constituency was rushing from one meeting to the another at the time when pandemic is still continuing. So the good news is that the agenda for 2020 is less busy, which gives us more chance to focus on the real implementation of many of the outcomes. If we look at the UNFCCC, first of all, of course, there will be several submissions that we have to focus on a bit more seriously. We will see the technical dialogues closing in June, and it's important because we will discuss this in the Global Stock Take, how we can participate in this process. Regional climate weeks are taking place in the Global South. The agenda, the dates are still not announced. We are expecting this to be announced soon, especially very likely it will be connected to the Emirates, the United Arab Emirates presidency, where they will announce their champions. One thing that is important, that it is time for the Global North also to start thinking of a climate week for Europe and Americas as well. This is also something that is giving us the chance that in order to speed up the climate action in the global north, we also have to have such mechanisms in force. So that's something that we could consider. Other than the UNFCCC, the UN agenda is pretty, let's say, as I said, less in terms of number of events, but particularly heavy in terms of its impacts. First of all, we have the Water Conference in Nairobi, in UN, in New York, in March. We have the second UN Habitat Assembly, which is particularly important for us because of the surge and urbanization ministerial. Let's remember, UN Habitat Assembly is taking place every 4 years. So unfortunately, this year it is overlapping with the first week of the UN climate negotiations, and that's one of the biggest weaknesses. But it is us who can turn this into an opportunity, and we will touch upon this as well later on. There will be the discussions on SDGs, especially review of the SDGs this year. We will include SDG 11 in July, but we will have the UN high-level summit, or UN high-level week in New York in September, which includes an SDG summit, which includes a preparatory meeting for the UN Summit of the Future in 2024, and we're also expecting to have some climate, the high-level dialogue. So that New York in September will be very busy. From our perspective as LGMA, or the global process outside the UN, the things that are very, very important are the G7 and G20 presidency, which will be particularly active in Asia. So India will lead G20 and Japan will lead the G7. And in both of these processes, we have very strong Urban 7 and Urban 20 engagement mechanisms. In the case of G7, we are expecting that the Mayor Summit, Urban 7 Mayor Summit, will be in early March, connected to Zero Carbon CD Forum. The environment ministers will be in April, the heads of state summit in May, and urbanization minister in July. So the Japanese government is continuing the legacy of Germany, and we're very happy that both climate and energy ministerial and urbanization will have strong relevances to COP27 outcomes and COP28 as well. G20 has a Mayor Summit announced in July in India. The Leaders Summit of Indian presidency will be held in September. I think it's just 2 weeks before the UN high-level week. We don't know too much of the other ministerial dates yet. We know urbanization is not a ministerial that G20 will have this year under India, but there will be strong legacy from the G20 during the Indian presidency. Daring cities will play a role in June, especially bridging the UN Habitat Assembly and UNFCCC. That will be the mission of Daring Cities 2023. Obviously, Urban October is also a fantastic opportunity for us because that it is giving us the chance, because this year COP is further in the calendar year, which is in December. So if we have some outcomes in September, the global stock take coming up, Urban October could be an opportunity for us to push for global stock takes at local level, and even multi-level stock takes could also happen. Obviously, as Felix has been putting in the chat box, we will expect others. For example, Global Plastics Treaty will continue its intergovernmental negotiation committees. Food System Summit will come in September. Obviously, these are the type of things that regularly comes or that comes with new elements, but the major ones that we wanted to highlight so that we can be a bit more strategically managing our time and energy. But of course, we will be very happy to hear engagement from other processes as well. So under these conditions, what could be a possible roadmap towards COP28? First of all, operationalization of surge. That is a key priority for us. Secondly, to stock take to be held at the local level and regional level. And thirdly, to accelerate UNFCCC engagement throughout the year. When it comes to operationalization of surge, of course, this was already designed as at least 2030 targets. The most important element of the surge is to have the national endorsement, the national governments who express interest to work with cities on holistic multi-level action and urbanization especially. We are encouraged by the statements announced, and as UN Habitat report is more than 50 national governments who have taken the floor. There are so many of them who couldn't take the floor but expressed their interest. So it has time to build on this now momentum. Obviously, as we said, UN Habitat Assembly is every 4 years, and it's the decision-making body of UN Habitat. It has to reflect on what is achieved in Sharm el-Sheikh and provide some further guidance. And it's a brilliant opportunity for us to make sure that it is connected to the COP28 as well. And obviously, Egypt, as the COP27 presidency, will continue to play a role because they're also the host of the World Urban Forum. So Egypt, thanks to their engagement in this process, will continue to be a partner in this process. But we have to make the synergy, especially with different ministers and different teams. One thing that was clear is while we were heavily working on surge, there was other processes, especially the action agenda. There were breakthrough agendas for parties. There were 20-30 breakthroughs for non-party stakeholders, and we have to make sure the surge is appropriately connected. At the moment, there's no linkage between these things, and the reason why this breakthrough agenda is important is that the national governments have invested and committed to work on those agendas, and this is for the first time acknowledged in the COP27 decision. So we have to make sure that what we have announced with surge is also finding its way in this global process as well. So it's not just the presidency, but also the whole UNFCCC system. Obviously, we have demonstrated that these 5 tracks are the ones that they will result in all these cross-cutting areas. We have to make sure there is progress in terms of how this new collaboration is taking place. And we are very happy when we heard from US that the announcement they are making in the scale or the Japanese International Citizenship Corporation could help us to speed up these efforts. And let's be realistic, every track could be in a different pace of progress. That's also realistic. And finally, of course, we would like to make sure that there is the continuity of the urbanization ministerial, hoping that the results will be much better reflected to the COP28 outcomes and the lessons learned from COP27. But of course, during this process, we'll also have to improve the governance and the secretariat so that the machinery behind Surge is also functioning and that it is serving to the partners. Obviously, UNHABITAT has started to have, first of all, a wrap-up of the urbanization ministerial. We're expecting that this morning they have announced that there will be a summary of the outcomes of the ministerial before Christmas, which means next week. We will be expecting soon to have additional consultations on the Surge theory of change and other requests from several partners, but we also expect some of the tracks to advance further than others. So that is what we would be expecting. And of course, we will make sure an appropriate linkages between UN-Habitat Assembly, UN climate talks in Bonn, and the rest of the process. Stocktake is something that is really important for us. As you all remember, we have the opportunity to provide the results from local and regional stocktakes to the global process. And in fact, in the last closing plenary of the technical dialogues, UNFCCC Executive Secretary personally said that, look, this process has to go to the political level. And we responded to him saying that having political debates on climate emergency and stocktake on Paris Agreement is a brilliant opportunity to bridge the urban community, the climate leadership of the cities and regional governments into the process. Every city hall can have this perspective of a mini COP. And in that sense, we already have started to discuss what could be the roles that could be played in such a session. We are saying that the three topics, the climate, national indices, the local commitment, and climate justice are the three topics that we could ask to focus on. And we're also saying that as of today, we do not have resources to manage this, but we would definitely propose that cities and regions, they themselves could step up to say that I want to dedicate a 1 day of the city hall or 1 day of the parliament of our regional government to a debate on Paris stocktake. And this could be an opportunity that they could deliver and they could dedicate their resources, and the LGMA partners, rather than organizing the session, they can come as partners to facilitate this dialogue, feed them with information, and make the bridge between communities, the local communities, and the local regional governments. That could something be a bit different than what we have done in the Talanoa dialogues, but under the realistic conditions and noting that the first 6 months is very important, I think that could be the easiest way we could put the stocktakes into practice. So we will probably come up with an additional idea in the next couple of weeks after the winter break, and then ask your inputs and suggestions as well. We will have to be more professional in UNFCCC engagement, as we have seen submissions and workshops. Loss and damage transitional committee is definitely not in our hands, but with Scottish government, we can provide more input to this process. Article 6, we have to work on it. Other than the negotiation like ACE, we'll have to work on it. But one big term opportunity or one big agenda is conflict of interest. I will touch upon it very shortly. Under this condition, we have already defined the calendar for monthly webinars every third Wednesday. We will circulate these dates to you. You can register through the same links. We are also considering the power of the LGMA daily briefing during the COP27. We are discussing whether we should turn this LGMA daily briefing to a bi-monthly mailing, especially knowing that the first 6 months of the 2022 will be even more demanding in terms of updates and coordination. So that can give us a real new opportunity as well. Last but not least, this conflict of interest, and I'm so happy that there are contributions in the chat box that we can go back to all of you and then start to hear from all of you. Conflict of interest is a big agenda that coming up in the UN climate space after the past couple of years. During this year, during the summer, UNFCCC Secretariat has started a process for enhancing engagement of observer participation in the process. One of the topics was conflict of interest by the fossil fuel industry. There were 5 constituencies who had made a proposal that they want those fossil fuel lobbyists to be excluded from this process. The UNFCCC Secretariat and some other constituencies came up with a proposal like maybe we can start by transparency of conflict of interest, so that there was a debate now going on. On the way to COP27, there was a push from these 5 constituencies that such a declaration should be signed up by every NGO attending the COP. And it was clear that technically this was too short notice and it was too much burdensome in terms of management of such a process. Let aside the content of it. So it was postponed for a further consultation. At COP27, the debate became even more higher. And we have maybe heard there were reports then saying that more than 600 representatives of fossil fuel lobby was at COP27. While this may be true, and this is very likely true because they have made an analysis, but let's be also realistic. It is normal that fossil fuel lobby has increased their participation because the overall management or the overall participation of the COP is increased. It was increased from 40 to 49,000. And even LGMA had more than 500 representatives at the COP. So 600, honestly speaking, is not an extremely big figure compared to the rest of the other constituencies. So in that sense, I think we really have to be fair. And let's also be realistic. It's not the number of your engagement, of course, how you influence with the parties. And of course, beyond the fossil fuel lobbies as observers, there are so many countries. We are talking about OPEC countries. We are talking about the global north and south having investments on fossil fuel by the governments and their public institutions. So the real fossil fuel lobby is not in the NGO side, but it's in the government side. And finally, that's also a reality that, I mean, we, unlike the biodiversity process, we cannot submit any documents to the UNFCCC process. It has to go through parties. Once again, it's not important how much you are there. It's important how you are feeling your relation with the parties and the way the parties are designed. So despite all these topics on the table, there was an additional call with the Secretariat and the constituencies. The position of the Secretariat was to have the debate on conflict of interest to a different process, with engaging with parties as well, and that it is not the mandate of this group. And this was a frustrating response or frustrating feedback to the expectation of these 5 constituencies, and they decided to walk out of this process. However, there are some still preparations are going forward, whether there may be in between and additional mechanisms. The executive secretary personally announced that he would like to see some changes even in the June sessions. So this agenda of conflict of interest will come back more and more, and we as LGMA should have a position on that sooner than later. And in that regard, let me give you the text of the proposal from these 5 constituencies in terms of what do they mean by what is the fossil fuel lobby and what do they mean by conflict of interest. Here is the definition that you can read. It says GHG emissions intensive processes, products, entities, and it is those who drive the GHG emissions intensive products. And honestly speaking, if you have a strict reading of such a big, broad definition, there's no one immune from this text. I mean, it's very hard how you would define the oil or coal producing cities and regions to be excluded from this kind of a perspective. And interest is also very broad. It says direct or indirect benefits, financial, non-financial contribution. Honestly speaking, all these fossil fuel industries who are paying taxes, and those local and regional governments who are getting their public money from those taxation of those fossil fuel industries, how would you make sure that they're excluded from this definition? So honestly speaking, if this type of a proposal is strictly applied, there's no LGMA constituency that could be participating in the UNFCCC process. This may be a bit exaggeration, but it is also a reality that this is a process that has to be really carefully thought through. And there's, of course, definitely a difference between an a conflict of interest of tobacco industry in the World Health Organization compared to fossil fuel industry in the UNFCCC process, because of the interconnected relation of all actors of the society, be it the users of fossil fuels or be it those who provide fossil fuels from resource to the market. So that it's much harder to differentiate, and that will be a huge discussion. However, I think it is really still important that the LGMA conference becomes also more concrete about how we address this issue. Under this condition, let's digest all these things, and I will give the floor now to participants who have already providing inputs to the debate. One final point in the biodiversity agenda, as I said, it's already going on, and I've received from Kobe that she's not able to join. There are interesting things going on there. First of all, there is a post-2020 global biodiversity framework being negotiated. They are saying that this is the Paris moment for biodiversity. There are reports that the negotiations are not very well advancing, but it is important to note that out of the 22 targets, which was at the beginning of the process, at the beginning of this week, or at the beginning of last week, was presented to the negotiations, one of them is reserved for green urban spaces. Target 12. It is an extremely powerful text. And the good news is that there's no brackets in this text. So what could be possible is that if a global biodiversity framework is adopted by the end of this weekend in Montreal, it is highly likely green urban spaces will be part of this new framework, which is, of course, much more advanced in terms of how the urban areas or urban communities are addressed in the Paris Agreement. So let's be realistic. In that sense, one of the things that we have to keep in mind that the biodiversity community has started to integrate non-party stakeholders in a strategic thinking as early as 2010. So it's already by the Secretariat and by parties that they are opening the doors for observers. They don't even call it observers there. But it is also true that the 10-year action plan that we have first implemented in the Aichi target space has a huge impact into this process as well. And this is the second important point. That decision, which is adoption of a second 10-year action plan for subnational governments and cities and other local authorities, is now removed from all brackets. There are interesting references, for example, cities with nature and regions with nature being reporting and monitoring platforms of this process. There are standalone advisory committees that are reporting to the Secretariat by subnational governments and also local governments. Each of them are their own institutional structures. And so there are so many new elements that is coming into the shape in the biodiversity agenda. There's something that they're also learning, and which is the first time they have their pavilion. That was also an inspiration from the UNFCCC talks. But it is also good that at the summit yesterday or Monday, we also had the opportunity to have Ambassador Ayman from the COP27 presidency to speak at the biodiversity summit of subnational governments and cities, so that there is a clear linkage between COP27 outcomes, including search, to the biodiversity space. With this in mind, I think I have time for stop here so that we can have a debate. I see a lot of inputs from Felix. Felix Dodds, our long-term friend and partner. Felix, feel free to take the floor and intervene if you want. I see Heloise from Regions 4. So a regional and local global stocktake event. So in Bonn. So that's what we are hoping, that the real local stocktakes should happen at home. Let's remember, in the Talanoa dialogue, we had 60 sessions of cities and regions Talanoa dialogues. Between now until June, we have to make sure there are stocktakes to be convened as wide as possible. And this is the place where we will bring to the technical dialogues. And from the decision in June, we should be using the political momentum, especially using the Urban October, and that some countries and some cities can have their own local regional stocktakes during the second half as well. But maybe with the momentum we bring from Bonn, we could even think about multi-level stocktakes. So in that regard, what we are trying to make sure in Bonn is how we design the daring cities, because it's the first initiative that was focusing on climate emergency at the local level. This will happen for this year now onwards in a physical format. And let's remember, the first week, 5th of June, Monday, both UNFCCC starting in Bonn and UN Habitat Assembly starting in Nairobi. Obviously, there will be a huge challenge in terms of who does what and where and how. So we want to make sure that at the beginning of UNFCCC talks on the 4th of this June, we may have a big event or we may have an interactive dialogue with the UNFCCC negotiators. From this feedback, we can feed into the UN Habitat Assembly, and then we can come back the second week of June, SP 58, with a more consolidated agenda of the but also bringing the results from UN Habitat Assembly. And taking into account these discussions, we can still plan from the year ahead, the rest of the year, to plan for additional, and in that sense, we call multi-level stock takes, if possible. There are very exciting discussions, for example, countries like Colombia, Brazil. These are the countries who are very, very aggressively supporting the multi-level agenda. These countries can be really playing a leadership role. The way we will roll out Surge could be important to help us this process. So there are a lot of opportunities. But of course, we would be happy if you can also start to share your ideas, how you want to take this process onwards. And Felix, exactly, this is the 4th of June that we want to make use the Sunday as an opportunity for multi-level action, Surge, stock takes as that moment for we get together and then feed into Nairobi. Some of us will go to Nairobi, some of us will stay in Bonn, and then we will all come back again to Bonn, where 12, 13, 14 of June will be the moment where we'll try to influence the UNFCCC COP27 and COP28 agendas. So that is how we are hoping to plan it. But as I said, we are looking forward to any ideas that could support this process as well. Anyone who wants to intervene, Felix, Eloise, Ursula, feel free to type or speak as much as you want. Eloise, please take the floor.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Yunus. So I just wanted to go back to the global stock take just to understand the process. So if I understand, it would be like the first few months kind of working with our regional leads or cities to see if they're interested to do local global stock takes. And then it would be about consolidating a common position for Bonn, just to understand, because I think you're totally right. It's about kind of checking in at the local and regional level, but I do believe that there is a need of a common message from LGMA about where are we at and what are we calling for in terms of strengthening multi-level governance in a time of implementation. And I suppose that's the moment at Bonn, and then consolidating up until the COP28. So I just wanted to understand if there will be a moment of joint consolidation of key messages that are bringing from the local to the LGMA, if that makes sense.
I mean, Eloise, what we want to build upon what is achieved with Surge and Urbanization Ministerial and the way it is rolled out at the UNF space, and then focusing on the other negotiation agendas. That should be our first priority. The stock takes, as I think, because at the global level, the debate is much different than what is taking place at the local level. And I think if we are serious saying that, look, you cannot solve the global climate agenda with 50,000 aid. Now, Felix says that 60,000 coming to 2 weeks. So why don't we think that every city hall turns into a mini COP? And the stock take could be an excellent opportunity. So I would like to suggest that on the global engagement mechanisms, we still invest our efforts on the Surge and the ministerial and this UNFCCC jargons and mechanisms. But for the real climate action, let's make sure everybody speaks about their own NDCs. What is their race to zero, race to resilience commitments, and how do they address climate justice domestically with their urban poor or urban disadvantaged communities and internationally? Let's make the stock takes as a debate on these topics so that it is concrete, it is making a change at the local level, it is influencing the national debate, and it is bringing citizens into the process. Whereas for the global process, we focus continuously on the the mechanisms that we are built. I mean, we really have to understand what is going on in the climate agenda, climate action agenda. What is the role of surge? What is the role of those breakthrough agendas? This debate is slightly irrelevant on what will be discussed at the City Hall on climate action and climate emergency. I recommend we make a clear differentiation on that. But as I said, it is time to have the briefing on that. Once again, the daring cities that we're organizing, we would offer this as a platform. We could shape these discussions. But if there are any other ideas, feel free to come back. But honestly speaking, having the UN Habitat Assembly at the same week of the first week of the UNFCCC is a huge challenge to plan something big in Bonn, because a lot of our members and leaders will have to be prioritizing Nairobi and then come back to June. So it's a bit challenging. Therefore, we recommend that in the first 6 months, like Earth Day, we should have as much as possible local stock takes or regional stock takes, that we can show this and evidence to the technical dialogues in June, so that from June onwards, maybe from the UNFCCC negotiations, we can come up with an idea of multi-level stock takes to happen from June onwards to COP28. So, I mean, this could be one option. None of them are either or. We can all build on or off. But let's have a discussion as early as possible next month, so that we advance further on that. Felix, why don't you take the floor? I see so many of
Can you hear me?
Yes, excellent, perfect.
I also want to say what a great job you and the team did at COP27. I thought it was amazing. I think that this is going to be a big COP because of the global stocktake. But there are many different places where you can start to build the narrative for the role of local government. I mean, you mentioned the water summit. You mentioned, I think, clearly the Bonn meeting on climate. You mentioned the UN Habitat meeting. I think you mentioned Sendai as well, which will be at the end of May. And disaster risk reduction is such an important part of the loss and damage process. And then I think the high-level political forum in July will be ministerial, then heads of state, and I think we'll have the Global Sustainable Development Report coming out at that particular time. And I wondered whether, because you've got the Food System Summit, which you engaged in as well, you've got these basically a review of where we are with financing for development, but the heads of state meeting on the SDGs, it seems to me if you want to do a climate, in a sense, profile for where you think local government plays, my suggestion in the chat box was that perhaps look at a heads of state with local government leaders round table at the SDG summit as something which would be useful. Thank you.
Thanks, Felix. These are all really very helpful inputs. First of all, I think, hello, is this something new hand you have raised, or is the old one? Okay.
Sorry.
Okay, great. So, because we're just also coming to the end of today's talks as well, Felix, excellent ideas. I mean, first of all, you remember at COP27 and during the Leaders Summit, we were trying to have more dialogue with heads of state level and ministerial level. We were a bit more hopeful because we had the Prime Minister of Egypt as an urban planner and a former Minister of Urbanization. It unfortunately could not turn out to be too effective like that. But there are a number of countries who are coming up very ambitiously, like Colombia, which is now president is the former mayor of Bogota, and environment minister is the former environment secretary of Bogota, and she's also the vice president of UNEA. We're expecting a huge agenda from Brazil. So if we see the G7, for example, leadership from Germany, from Japan and US, I mean, there is an important summit of Americas on cities summit in April. This also will be an important thing. So if we have these powerful countries to really have a debate, and what you have proposed could be possible if it is well designed. We are aware, as the coordinator of the Global Task Force, UCLG, is planning a local regional governments forum during SDG Summit in New York in September. So we also have to work with them. We're also aware that during the UN High Level Week in September this year, there will be an important prep meeting for the Summit for the Future, which will be designed for 2024. And that's also something that we should be carefully following. So my point is that the multi-level action is becoming a fashion much more than ever, much stronger than ever. And climate, biodiversity, migration, these are the avenues that we're very strong in. SDGs, localization. I fully agree. If the global community of urban networks could play the game well, and knowing that we don't have too many net events this year. I mean, everyone is settled down with their boards, with their congresses. Nothing is now on the table. It's a brilliant opportunity for us to invest in that, and then using UN Habitat Assembly also as a stepping stone. I hope the rest of the Global Task Force, and together with other partners, we can make sure. We are expecting UCLG to announce a Global Task Force prep meeting, I think early February. That could be the moment we can also design these things. But I'm more than happy to have your contributions into the design of this. And once again, coming to the Emirates, Dubai, honestly speaking, I'm really worried if really this is the vision of 60,000 people. I see no real benefit or value, but I hope I'm wrong. But it is really that if we really want to make a major shift or major change of the mindset and also the way of engagement, if we're in the implementation phase, COPs with this kind of thousands of people cannot serve this purpose. It's over. That era is over. And it's not just the COPs. I mean, maybe I should put it as well. The global geopolitics is also changing. I mean, let's remember, that's my last point. We were in the era of, during the 1990s, that anyone who was taking action was putting a prerequisite that the other takes an action. That was the burden sharing era. Everyone was waiting for the other to do that. Then we had the Copenhagen moment, you know very well. It was designed as if two countries, if G2 agrees together, they can shape the world. That didn't happen either. Then we had been coming to this area of Paris Agreement, which is, if you leave this train, go ahead, it is your point, but we will go ahead. And then you will go ahead with those most ambitious ones. And that was the racist model. And we've come to an era, for the first time, the developing countries, it was originally only AOSIS, but now the developing countries united with Pakistan, a very major developing country, a very small island, it's a big country, plus EU, who shaped the agenda despite the biggest countries like US, China, Russia, or Saudi Arabia, those who are powerful economically and politically, they were resisting the agenda of loss and damage since the beginning. But the power of this big coalition, it's even more than this high ambition coalition, they made a change. So this is the new UNFCCC. It's not anymore Annex 1, non-Annex 1, and it's not anymore we as observers. Things have changed a lot, and the UNFCCC and the COPs should also change a lot if we really want to make a result out of it. This was the first time, I think it was Sir David King who said that COPs are circus. It was on the way to Glasgow, and everybody was very uncomfortable. After Sharm el-Sheikh, I'm hearing so many of people who are saying about circus. Let's make sure that we ourselves are not our own enemies. Let's not shoot our own feet. Let's make sure COPs are really worthwhile, and we have to be innovative and creative in the age of digitalization. Okay. Hannah, we're in touch with Hannah Al-Hashimi, especially both because of the Global Stocktake. She's the co-chair of the contact group on Stocktake, but she's also very actively involved. There was a representative from Emirates to the Cairo workshop, and we are expecting them to come to us soon in terms of the new champion of the Emirates. I was not aware she was in the Rio +20 and SDG in New York. So it's very good hint. And if you can also help us to provide additional inputs to Hannah, and you can send my warm regards. We are in continuous debate with her, dialogue, let's not debate, dialogues. But it's definitely, I mean, maybe this is again, I'm always saying last night, but as you know, I cannot stop myself talking about climate and COPs. But the point is, look at what we achieved in a country like Egypt. Egypt is a country well known for its top-down approach for any issues. We all know that. And even if we can achieve such a vision of multi-level action, imagine if we're going to a country like Emirates, which is by default, it's a bottom-up. It is based on decentralized, decentralized autonomy of the states of the Emirates. So that's why I'm saying that with all the limitations of COP27, we have made a solid ground. We have a solid base. From now on, we can run faster, both in the multi-level action, but also being an ambitious climate action, because we have both climate ambition and climate justice addressed into the space of the UNFCCC process. And again, multi-level is the place where we can bridge all of this. Definitely. So my concluding remarks, first of all, a big thank you. And Felix, thanks a lot for your kind remarks as well, to all the LGMA partners who have been walking this process together in Sharm el-Sheikh and beyond and before. I'm very proud of our achievements. We really have to now take a deep breath, digest all these outcomes, and make this winter break to refresh ourselves and come with an even bigger momentum and motivation and enthusiasm. With these remarks, once again, thanks to all. Look forward to seeing you next year, and have a nice day and have a nice week ahead.